As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
Fast forward to December 2024. President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was mired in a lot of scandals involving himself and his wife, very frustrated and cornered, he, out of frustration, contemplated this martial law declaration. His aides testified later that he often talked about this option of martial law, and he thought that that was the only option to tackle all the problems that he was facing, political and personal problems. Some of the similarities include, there are many of them. For example,
Aloha, and welcome to Dialogue, where conversation shapes security. I'm your host, James Minnick, Colonel United States Army retired and professor here at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii. It's a pleasure to have you join us for Dialogue 36, Korea's Martial Law Fallout. South Korea is navigating one of the most significant political crises in its modern democratic history. On December 3rd, President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law, citing the need to eradicate pro-North Korean forces and protect the constitutional order of freedom. Although swiftly overturned by the National Assembly, this move plunged the nation into political turmoil, reignited memories of past authoritarianism, and fractured Korea's political system. On December 14, Yoon was impeached, marking the beginning of a fraught leadership transition. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo served briefly as acting president, but was impeached after 2 weeks, leaving Vice Prime Minister and Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok to guide the country during this uncertain period. The Constitutional Court is now deliberating President Yoon's impeachment, a process that could take months, while South Korea faces mounting economic challenges, diminishing international credibility, and critical questioning about its future role as a global pivotal state. The fallout has been extraordinary. Investigations into treason, unlawful arrests, and abuse of power have implicated Yoon, senior members of his administration, and high-ranking military officials. Authorities have detained and indicted several leaders, including the former defense minister, martial law commander, and heads of the Defense Intelligence Command, Defense Counterintelligence Command, Special Warfare Command, and Capital Defense Command for their alleged roles in this crisis. Public trust in political leadership has frankly plummeted to historic lows. Internationally, the crisis has posed challenges to South Korea's diplomatic relationships and raised questions about its standing as a democratic leader. Neighboring countries, including the United States, have acknowledged the potential implications for regional instability, and emphasized the importance of resolving the situation through democratic and lawful processes. Economically, the nation faces a weakened won, volatile markets, and deepened investor skepticism, worsening the long-standing Korea discount and underscoring the need for strong, decisive leadership. As South Korea navigates this precarious moment, pressing questions remain. How will this crisis impact South Korea's relationships with the United States and Japan, particularly in terms of trilateral security cooperation and regional economic ties? What immediate domestic priorities, such as economic recovery and restoring public trust, must be addressed? And how might the leadership transition shape South Korea's foreign policy? Most importantly, what steps can South Korea take, drawing from its history, to strengthen its democratic institutions and restore public trust amid this crisis? The stakes could not be higher, not only for South Korea, but for the Indo-Pacific and beyond. In the months ahead, the resilience of South Korea's democracy, the adaptability of its leaders, and the unity of its people will be put to the test. Today we have the privilege of discussing these critical issues with Dr. Lami Kim, a professor at DKI APCSS and a former South Korean diplomat who specializes in nuclear nonproliferation and Northeast Asia security. Lami Kim, welcome back to Dialogue.
Thank you, James.
Super glad to have you here. And our viewers will actually frankly remember that you were here not so long ago when you appeared on episode 32. In that episode we talked about Seoul between Moscow and Pyongyang. That was just late last year. And then in episode 5 we sat down and we spoke about nuclear Indo-Pacific back in late 2023. We're glad to have you back. Now let's get to it. Let's talk a little bit about the historical and political context. President Yoon Suk-yeol's December 3rd martial law declaration has drawn some comparisons to Chun Doo-hwan's 1979 coup and subsequent impositions of martial law. And in fact, that's probably fresher than it otherwise might have been in people's minds because, as you and I were just talking about, just a year before this martial law declaration, a pretty well-known movie came out called 12/12 The Day, which was, or in Korean, Sole Bom, which is about Chun Doo-hwan's coup. So let me ask you this question. What are the key differences in motivations, executions, and even political intent between these events? And what other updates might you offer us or lessons from Korean history that can help us understand this current crisis?
Yeah, thank you, James. So Chun Doo-hwan's coup in 1979 was a coup, a military coup, which is a power grab by the military, whereas Yoon's coup is a self-coup because it's a sitting president trying to seize power, consolidate power by using force. But those two cases bear striking similarities. To answer this question, let me just go back a little bit further to the establishment of the Republic of Korea in 1948. And for about 12 years after that, South Korea was under dictatorial rule of the founding president Lee Sung-man, civilian dictatorship. Which ended with a social revolution in 1960, and South Korea, for the first time, democratically elected leader Prime Minister Chang Myon. But then South Korea's first experiment with democracy lasted only a year when Park Chung-hee staged a coup in 1961, which marked the beginning of 26-year military dictatorship in South Korea. And Park Chung-hee filled key civilian and military positions with army officers who contributed to his successful coup, and Chun Doo-hwan was one of them. And Chun Doo-hwan formed a secretive private group called Hanawe in 1963, along with his classmates from the Korean Military Academy, which is a service academy for the South Korean Army, which is the equivalent of the West Point here. Right. And these people, the Hanawe people, ruled the country, helped Park Chung-hee ruled the country for many years until Park Chung-hee was assassinated in 1979. And Chun Doo-hwan was a key figure, a very powerful military officer at that time. And he overthrew President Che Gyuwa, who was elected through an indirect presidential election. So the coup started in December 1979, as you mentioned. He first staged a mutiny to control the military, and then later dissolved the National Assembly and established the puppet legislative body, which in turn elected him as president. And he faced with, and eventually he became president in August 1980. And he faced with significant protest, especially in Gwangju, in the Jeolla province. In May 1980, President Chun Doo-hwan and his second person in line, No Tae-woo, massacred hundreds of people in Gwangju. So fast forward to December 2024. President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was mired in a lot of scandals involving himself and his wife, very frustrated and cornered, he, out of frustration, contemplated this martial law declaration. His aides testified later that he often talked about this option of martial law, and he thought that that was the only option to tackle all the problems that he was facing, political and personal problems. Some of the similarities include, there are many of them. For example, Yoon also tried to dissolve the National Assembly and try to establish a legislative body, it's a puppet legislative body, and it colluded with military commanders. Although there is no official private club in the military, in South Korean military anymore, however, he appointed some key people and his loyalists in key positions, both in the military and the civilian security sector positions, and they paid allegiance to the president, not to the constitution or to the nation. But I think that the key difference, though, is that really the South Korean people, the citizens, now with over 40 years of experience with democracy, they are very mature. I think much more mature than South Korean politicians. They came out and organized and put together very peaceful protests. I often just jokingly say they are professional protesters. They know how to do it, and their protests never become violent and therefore legitimate. So, and then the media, they didn't succumb to the government's threat, and they reported on what was happening. The citizens, just minutes after the martial law was declared, they gathered at the National Assembly to help the members of the National Assembly to lift martial law. And the military folks, soldiers deployed there, didn't really carry out the orders in earnest. That was sort of passive form of insubordination to prevent the martial law declaration in a dictatorial role. So that contributed to the failure of Yoon's self-coup.
You know, as you were talking, it made me even reflect on some of my own personal history. I actually, with the Army, had deployed to, or was assigned to Korea just months after Chun Doo-hwan's coup and becoming president. And even the protests, while they become professional, I remember it used to be pretty, actually South Korea has some pretty heated protests over the years, and you couldn't not be in, built up areas without just, the constant taste and smell of tear gas in the air. It was pronounced in those years. But as we think about, this South Korea's democratic transition and this 26-year transition that you spoke about from military dictatorships to 1987 when they like you mentioned, when they installed their first actually I guess No Tae-woo was elected, right? Then into office. But as you think through that process, I mean, how could martial law decree occur in a country today with such democratic legacy that you kind of spoke about here? How does that happen?
Yeah, so I think to answer that question, I think that we have to look at both individual factors and structural factors. Of course, there are some politicians who could contemplate something like this, this outrageous, but I think we have to look at the structural factors that made this possible. Because there can be a black swan event, but and then his martial law attempt, the self-coup attempt, eventually failed. But what is really striking and concerning is how could so many people supported Yoon, and also how could so many people are still could be still supporting Yoon.
Yeah.
Right, and so even though the martial law was lifted within 2.5 hours, and he was impeached. But if you think about how many members of the ruling party try to defend President Yoon from the impeachment, so he was impeached on the 14th of December, but only after 2 attempts. In the first attempt, only 3 people from the ruling party were present; others were boycotting the voting. And in the second attempt, only 12 out of 108 ruling party members voted in favor of impeachment. And since then, many members of the ruling party have been trying to block the appointment of Supreme Court justices in order to, I think, maybe bring back President Yoon to power. Yeah. And he now has been defying an arrest warrant, which is a huge affront to the rule of law. But many members of the ruling party are still supporting him, and actually they were gathering in front of the presidential compound residence in order to support Yoon's obstruction of justice. And so we have to think about not just what Yoon did and how so many people are still supporting him and supported him before the martial law and afterwards, and are still supporting afterwards. So some of the problems include one, the South Korean constitution gives the president too much authority. I mean, this is sort of a common problem in all presidential systems, but South Korean president has even more power than some other presidents in the world. For example, in the United States, when the president appoints a cabinet member and Congress vetoes it, the president cannot appoint those cabinet members. But in South Korea, the president can do that. And in fact, President Yoon Suk-yeol appointed about, I think, 29 people, at least 29 cabinet members overriding veto from the National Assembly. And Defense Minister Kim Yong-yeon was one of those people the National Assembly vetoed. But nonetheless, and actually you remember that at the confirmation hearings,
back in September.
Right, opposition party members actually raised the possibility of martial law.
Yeah.
But even despite those concerns, President Yoon Suk-yeol appointed Kim Yong-yeon, and there are many other cabinet members he appointed despite the veto from the National Assembly, which means that many cabinet members are loyalists to Yoon, and they colluded with Yoon, and they carried out the martial law decree, and sometimes South Korean presidents just exercise power that goes beyond what the Constitution allows. For example, in the Yoon's case, he interfered in the party leadership's decisions, including selecting which candidates can run for office. Which means that many members of the ruling party are loyalists or Yoon supporters, and so that explains why so many people in the ruling party are still supporting Yoon. Lastly, and I think that this is the most important factor, which is that polarization, very severe polarization and tribalism. So many people in the ruling party, and I think the conservative constituents, believe that what Yoon did was wrong. But still they think that Yoon is our bad guy.
Yeah.
And the opposition is even worse. And especially the opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, is hugely unpopular. And so I think they would do whatever it takes to prevent the other side from taking power. And so, this is a very deeply troubling status of South Korea's democracy.
Yeah, no, there's so much to pull apart from what you mentioned, and trying to keep myself from wanting to hit too many of those right away. Let's focus first on the military piece, and we'll come back to talking a little bit more about some of the political pieces here in a minute. I might note for the audience, I mean, when you talk about loyalists, I mean, so the former defense minister, I mean, they were high school chums. They went to school together, as did some of the others. And so they've known each other for a very long time. When during the confirmation back in September, it was just before the reshuffle of the military leaders. And so it put him in place to help in this reshuffling. A part of the system I've noticed over years is it's very common, not very common, it always occurs where the administration, when it comes in, it puts in all new military leaders. In fact, often what we'll see is they'll promote a 3-star to be the chairman, requiring everybody that's senior to him to retire, to leave service. And so you start picking your people and eliminating the other ones, and that is unique in Korea. And so then I guess I might ask you how this civil-military relationship between the two and the ability for the military to interfere in these politics, talk more about that, because it's a bit unique, I think, in Korea.
Yeah, sure. Still, there are lingering legacies of the military dictatorship. So unfortunately for me, so I had to complete an article entitled "Between Military Coup and Civilian Control: An Assessment of South Korea's Civil-Military Relationship," where I argued that just because there hasn't been a military coup in South Korea doesn't mean that South Korea's civil military relations is healthy. And now I even have to change the title because there was a coup.
Right.
But I think I could see a lot of problems in South Korea's civil military relations. One is that all the civilian positions, key civilian positions like ministers of national defense and deputy minister, vice ministers, they were all filled by former military generals, former military officers, especially army generals. And so Kim Yong-yeon and Shin Won-sik, so all three ministers of national defense under Yoon were all former military army generals, all from the Korean military, all graduates from the Korean Military Academy. So this is a hugely problematic because, these positions, these people are in charge of overseeing the military. But then sometimes, it's just not hard to imagine that they still represent the interests of the military, especially interests of their service, army, in many cases. And so this is very problematic. And also, there's a huge concentration of power among army generals, especially graduates from the Korean Military Academy. So all those people that you mentioned, the army chief, the martial law commander, and all these military commanders that executed Yoon's martial law were appointed by Kim. They have very strong ties with Kim Yong-yeon, the defense minister, who had very close ties with Yoon Suk-yeol. And all of them, every single one of them is graduates of the Korean Military Academy. So I don't have anything against the academy itself. They are the best and brightest. But then there's a problem if so many people are concentrated in so many people with same background are concentrated in key positions, then they can collude without fear of leaks, right? And the last problem that I want to point out is the affinity of the military with the conservative party and the South Korean conservatives. This partisanship is very dangerous because this, makes it tempting for civilian leaders from the conservative party to take advantage of the military's allegiance to that individual or the party. Which is what happened in this case as well.
Fascinating. Let's transition in a minute. Let's talk a little bit about the diplomatic implications of what's now occurred. And so, without a doubt, this is having some reverberation within the region, even to some degree. The United States is a bit guarded with how things are going as well. And so, let me ask you this question. How might these events actually affect South Korea's alliance with the United States and its standing in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, I would say that this incident has undermined South Korea's trustworthiness as an ally. The bilateral relationship between the two countries had almost never been better. This alliance was not only based on strategic importance, but also based on shared values. But it's kind of ironic that the South Korean president, who has been most vociferously advocating for democracy and human rights abroad, has done something like this to undermine the democratic system at home. On the facade, though, I think the alliance has appeared to return to normalcy. The Biden administration has expressed its intent to continue to work with South Korea, and Secretary of State Blinken recently visited South Korea, and then the nuclear consultative group meeting
Friday.
that was canceled right after the martial law declaration was held last week. However, I think that it would be surprising if Washington was not shocked and then disappointed with Seoul.
Well, I think I would even go so far as to say I think it was just Friday, National Security Advisor Sullivan had indicated that he was shocked and concerned about what had happened.
Right.
That was wrong.
Right. One of the cardinal rules of alliance management is avoiding surprising your ally, right? But, I guess it is understandable that Yoon didn't consult Washington before declaring martial law, but Yoon didn't even inform Washington of this afterwards. In fact, on the night that martial law was declared, U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Goldberg called the foreign minister and the national security advisor, and both of them didn't answer the phone calls. So that sort of things add to concern. However, I'm not saying that this damage is irreparable. South Korea remains as an important ally to the United States, but South Korea will have to rebuild trust.
Okay. I think you're right about all of that. Now, there is change happening in the United States as well, right? Next week, we'll have a new administration here. And so it's going to impact, I would assume, South Korea's diplomatic priorities. How so?
Yeah, so this incident happened, the timing of this incident, the martial law saga, was very unfortunate because of the political transition in the United States. It is widely expected that President Trump will press Seoul to increase South Korea's contributions to defense, cost sharing, to reduce South Korea's trade surplus with the United States, and to do more to help the U.S.'s efforts to counter China. And also there has been a concern that Trump would engage with North Korea, maybe even establish an arms control deal instead of the denuclearization deal, which South Koreans are very concerned about. And there are other issues that South Korea will have to pay attention to. And without this incident, the Yoon administration would have been very busy preparing for the second Trump presidency. And it is very critical to negotiate and talk with the incoming president during the critical first 100 days or first many days where the new administration's policy is shaping. But South Korea will miss this opportunity and hope. I mean, also all these negotiations will probably have to be postponed until a new leadership is established in South Korea, and so this missed opportunity could have long-term consequences.
Let's go back then and talk a little bit about this process of establishing a new leader. And so, as I mentioned in the opening, President Yoon was impeached December 14th, so that was 1 month ago. And then the Prime Minister, per the Constitution, Han Duck-soo, he became the acting president, but then within 2 weeks was impeached himself. Now, the Vice Minister, who's also the Finance Minister, Choi Sang-mok, I mean, he's now serving as the acting president, and things seem to be holding okay there. So, as you walk us through a little bit about this, this turbulent period, helping us understand what happens, I also want you to talk a little bit about, what's Yoon's future? Where does this go from here, and the type of timeline that we're looking at? So, please.
Yeah, sure. I think that he will be removed from office. The Constitutional Court is beginning actually the first hearing today, later today. So 5 hearings have already been scheduled, and the Constitutional Court has expressed its will to really expedite this process because, prolonged power vacuum is not a very good thing for the country's stability. And so I think he will be removed from office for sure. I don't normally make definitive predictions, but on this one, I'm 100% certain because what he did on December 3rd is obviously unconstitutional and obviously illegal. So the conditions required for declaring martial law were not met. It was not a state of emergency for South Korea. It was a state of emergency for Yoon Suk-yeol and his wife, but not for the country. And then he made the decision without consulting cabinet members. He didn't inform the National Assembly of the decision, and he tried to paralyze the National Assembly, which is illegal because even under legal martial law, the president doesn't have the authority to paralyze the National Assembly, which is the only body that can lift martial law.
That's right.
And this is not included in the impeachment motion, but what he has been doing since then, like defying an arrest warrant legally issued by a court. He may have some problems with the legality, but he could contest it within the system, legal system. He cannot arbitrarily just independently decide that this is illegal and ignore it. So all those things I think will expedite the process, and it shows that he is unfit to be president. So yeah.
Yeah, no, all those things are in fact going on. You said that this would go quickly, and I might note, while I guess they've got 180 days by by design to be able to respond to the impeachment order or the impeachment decision. There are some factors which probably necessitate this going quicker than that, and I note that 2 of the 8 justices have retirements in April, and so if you're saying how quick will this go, I'm sure they want that finished before that occurs, as it was a sticking point to even get going on this the Constitutional Court meeting because of not having a quorum of members, and so there's a number of factors that involve with this. I think right now there are 4 or 5 hearings that are set between now and February 3rd, and that's all that is set. And then the parallel effort that's going on by the CIO, the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking individuals, is looking at treason charges, and so this is playing on at the same time. It's an amazingly busy space for things that are happening right now. Let's talk a little bit about political transition and implication. If leadership change occurs, then how might South Korea's foreign policy and its role in the global pivotal state evolve?
Yeah.
How might that change? You've written actually about the global pivotal state.
Yeah, the chapter.
The forthcoming book. Yes.
Yeah, has become obsolete before it's out because you will be gone. So, so then to who's going to be the next leader is very relevant to the
so say more about that.
Yeah. So well, as it is now, Lee Jae-myung is the forerunner in all the polls that have been conducted recently. He's
a forerunner in the opposition party, right? The Democratic Party.
Yes, Democratic Party. But if you look at the polls, so he's polling at above 30%, while all other presidential hopefuls from all parties are polling below 10%. Hong Joon-pyo and Kim Min-soo, they are conservative presidential hopefuls, but they are polling at 9%, 6%, right. It varies a little bit, but they don't really have a chance because they are Yoon supporters, and so it will be difficult for them to get centrist votes. Lee Jae-myung is, interestingly, the most liked candidate, but also the most disliked candidate. Over 40% of South Koreans don't like him to be the president, but because we believe that, we agree that the Constitutional Court will conclude the trial pretty quickly, I expect it to be by the end of next month.
Probably.
So that means the presidential election will occur in late April or early March.
That's right, because there's 2 months from.
Right. Yeah.
Say more.
Right. The presidential election has to happen after 60 days.
Yeah.
Not within 60 days, but after 60 days. And so, he's really the only viable candidate as it is now. Although he's also mired in a lot of scandals, and he was actually convicted of a violation of election law during the 2022 presidential election. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison with 2-year probation, and he's facing a lot of other trials. I think that there are 4 or 5 trials that are going on at the same time, and if he's convicted in the highest court, and he won't be able to run for 5 years. However, if the election occurs within 2 to 3 months, he will be eligible to run. So then let's assume that he becomes the next president. Then South Korea's foreign policy will see a lot of changes, starting with the global pivotal state, the Indo-Pacific.
So let's enumerate them a little bit. Let's start with the global pivotal state. Explain that a little bit, and then why might it change?
Right. So global pivotal state is a vision that President Yoon put forward. Basically, it is situating, sort of promoting South Korea's role in the global stage, going beyond its traditional focus on the Korean Peninsula. But
and this manifested a number of ways. I mean, uniquely, right? I mean, particularly engagements in Europe and with NATO and different things. And so, talk a little bit about about that, and how, if there's a change, how it might manifest itself.
Right. Yeah. So one, representation of the policy is Yoon's support for Ukraine and sanctions against Russia, which his predecessor Moon Jae-in was reluctant to do. But I think, assuming that that Ukraine war ends quickly, just we don't know,
Right.
but maybe before Lee Jae-myung becomes the president, I think the biggest change that we'll see is the Indo-Pacific strategy, South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy, which I believe falls under the global pivotal state vision. So I think Lee Jae-myung will go back to President Moon's policy of sort of strategic ambiguity, of seeking to be somewhere between the United States and China, reversing President Yoon's, strong alignment with the United States and its efforts to counter China. I think there are many reasons to believe that would happen. One is that when the opposition party, Democratic Party, wrote this impeachment motion for Yoon, they included Yoon's alienation of China, of North Korea, and Russia, and quote unquote his strange Japan-focused policy. So that makes me believe that Lee Jae-myung will probably try to mend fences with Beijing and will continue to work with the United States, but a little bit more distance from the United States than the Yoon administration was.
Let's pull on some of that. So 1965 was the year that they normalized South Korea and Japan normalized relations, right? And so that was 60 years ago this year. And so they're celebrating that. I have watched a closer relationship with under the current administration with Japan than we typically see. So if Lee Jae-myung comes to power, how does that change with the relationship with Japan? How does that change?
So Lee has been very critical of Yoon's policy toward Japan. He called it as a humiliating, a subservient policy to Japan. And I just talked about the impeachment motion that criticized Yoon's policy toward Japan. And so, it is Japan. The Japanese are very concerned about what's going to happen under Lee. And those concerns are valid. I think that we'll see is sort of a strained relationship between Japan and South Korea, and which would have a negative impact on the trilateral cooperation along with the United States. So before this happened, because of the political transition in Japan and the United States, many believe that South Korea, the Yoon administration, will carry the torch for the trilateral cooperation, especially because we don't really know if President Trump will be as enthusiastic about the trilateral cooperation as President Biden has been. But I don't really think that we can expect that. And Lee has been particularly critical of Japan's release of what some called nuclear wastewater, or others called treated water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant, and the list goes on. And so, yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest changes to South Korea's foreign policy.
All right, let me ask you about another potential big change, and that's its relationship with North Korea. How does that change? I mean, it's not going to go back to how it was under the previous progressive administration, because you can't put the genie back in the bottle, but how does it change?
Right, I don't really expect another Panmunjom meetings between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un, because North Korea is not really that interested in engaging with South Korea anymore. But I think that Lee Jae-myung will try to engage with North Korea, will try to, reduce tension on the Korean Peninsula. So I think his North Korea policy will be aligned with the traditional progressive policy, which emphasizes diplomacy and dialogue, and threat reduction, as opposed to those of the conservatives, which emphasizes deterrence, power through strength, and it's just sort of more hardline policy. And Lee has been very critical of Yoon's policy toward North Korea, which he viewed as very unnecessarily hawkish.
Let's talk a little bit about South Korea's own domestic priorities that it'll deal with. How does that change under administration?
So I think the progressive conservative divide when it comes to domestic policies is pretty similar to the Democratic and Republican divide in the United States.
So say more, because I think you're probably right, but say more.
Yeah, so the conservatives promote this growth-driven economy, more incentives for innovation, less government regulations. When it comes to social issues, more sort of conservative traditional values when it comes to gender and etc. Whereas the progressives emphasize more sort of more egalitarian economic policies, distribution, more government regulations, and more liberal social policies when it comes to minorities, gender minority issues, and etc. Ordinarily, though, the president has a more influence over foreign policies rather than domestic policies. However, if Lee becomes president, then both executive and the legislative branches of the government will be controlled by the Democratic Party, which has 170 out of 300 votes at the National Assembly, which is more than a simple majority. And so I think we will see some sweeping changes, which makes the people on the other side very nervous.
Yeah, in fact, I think I'm sure that's what's driving a lot of the decision making, is while they may not approve of the actions that took place with the declaration, they worry about a repeat of having the conservatives out of power like occurred when Park Geun-hye was impeached several years ago. There are, in fact, many issues to be to watch and see how these things transpire. As you think about the future, South Korea's future, its democratic future, what do you see as the trajectory? Where's this going to go? Put on your futurist hat, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So, right after the martial law declaration, many experts came out and celebrated the resilience of South Korea's democracy. And I wish I could share that sentiment, but unfortunately, I cannot really, because there are so many problems. I think the challenges facing South Korea's democracy run very much deeper than we thought before. There are a lot of issues that they have to address. For example, as I mentioned earlier, tribalism, polarization, and disinformation. About those 35% of South Koreans who support Yoon believe that there was an election fraud, which has been which is a fake news. National Intelligence Service, South Korea's spy agency, looked into this issue and they didn't find anything. But nonetheless, people just believe that. So a lot of YouTubers are just spreading this false information. They have to address that. I don't know how. I mean, this is a problem that many other countries are dealing with. And I've been critical of the ruling party, but I don't support any party. I'm an American citizen. But both parties have just stopped trying to negotiate and make compromises. I mean, I've been critical of the ruling party today because on this issue, Yoon's martial law declaration, I mean, I think that they are defending Yoon is wrong. But the Democratic Party also has, just because they have a lot of seats at the National Assembly, they just just didn't try to negotiate with the other side. And so I think that both parties are to blame, and then they really have to address a lot of civil military relations. So I wish I could be more optimistic, but they have a lot of problems to solve.
And some of these problems, I mean, they're really long, enduring problems. This issue of tribalism in your words, or maybe factionalism in mine. I mean, that's what brought down. So, when Lee Sung-man was thrown out of power in April of '60 with the student uprising, and Chung goes into office as a prime minister, like you said, they're trying to figure out how to limit the power of the head of state, and because of the factionalism, you really can't govern. And then Park Chung-hee then says, well, I'm going to get in there and take over. I mean, it's just, and so this issue of problems in government is long. Factionalism in government, trying, keeping each side from governing, and even when they do, the challenges come through, and those are long enduring issues of civil military, like you spoke about. Again, a very intractable issue that if we're going to see real enduring change, we're going to have to really get after some of these real thorny problems that keep coming up. We've got several audience questions, so let's turn a little bit and answer some of those. This first one is asking about strategy or desperation, and maybe you spoke a little bit, but you can tease out a little bit more on here. Should we understand President Yoon's martial law declaration as a proactive, strategic move to consolidate power and undermine opposition, or was it a reactive, desperate attempt to cling on to political survival and growing challenges? So tease a little bit more out of that.
Yeah, I think some people thought that initially that this move was sort of a spontaneous move out of by a desperate leader who had a lot of problems. But I don't think that it was very spontaneous move. It was actually, pre-planned. In fact, some testified that they started planning for this starting from like March last year, but actually they started preparing for it like in earnest in November last year. But it was not a spontaneous decision. It was definitely a desperate move, though, because some of these scandals were really going to go blow out, right before the martial law declaration, and also the opposition party was going to impeach the defense minister Kim Yong-yeon. So I think that they probably decided that they couldn't wait any longer. That move was aimed at consolidating his power and undermining the opposition party. However, I wouldn't call it a strategic move because strategy is about aligning ends and means. And then Yoon's choice of martial law to tackle all of his problems is just, irrational, because I think, the first thing that you need to do is is the feasibility test. When you set up a strategy, you have to ask whether it is feasible. But as I mentioned earlier, the South Korea has very vibrant civil society. A lot of people are out and protested, young people especially. And so, it is possible that he maintained the martial law order a little bit longer if they were successful in preventing the members of National Assembly from going into the National Assembly and voting. But how long could he have lasted? I don't really think that it was a feasible option. And so for that reason, I don't think that it was a strategic move.
Okay. The next question is asking about North Korea's strategic calculations. So how likely it is that North Korea will exploit the political turmoil in Seoul to advance its own strategic interests?
So I think that some may be curious why North Korea has been pretty quiet, although North Korea fired a hypersonic missile last week. But other than that, though, North Korea has been pretty quiet. And if I were Kim Jong-un, I will remain that way, because Kim Jong-un really wants Yoon gone, because Yoon has been very hawkish and very hostile toward North Korea, especially his unification doctrine. We talked about this before. It basically, essentially, aimed at encouraging North Koreans to overthrow the Kim regime, when Kim Jong-un was already very, very anxious about South Korea's influence and the influence of South Korea's pop culture. And so if I were Kim Jong-un, I would just remain quiet and wait for Yoon's impeachment, because any provocations by North Korea would play into Yoon's hands, and it would bolster the conservatives and Yoon. And so yeah, I think that it is in the interest of North Korea to just remain silent.
Okay. Let's talk about strengthening the U.S.-South Korea relations. And this question is a bit nuanced, but it asks, how can the United States and South Korea enhance cooperation this year in 2025, particularly in technology innovation exchanges amidst this political crisis that's going on?
I think, at lower level, actual, like the things on the ground, I don't think that have been affected too much by the martial law declaration or this power vacuum in South Korea. And people on the ground at the lower level just continue to do what they are supposed to do, what they've been doing. However, when it comes to technology and innovation cooperation, I've been skeptical about the prospect anyway, because these two countries are in many ways partners but also competitors. And so, and then those people, the actors that are driving technological innovation are private sector, private companies. And then I don't really think that they have strong incentives to share their technology and, collaborate nonetheless, though, I think that there are some areas where they can cooperate. And then just last week, actually, we saw something very encouraging, which is that the two countries decided to iron out some differences on the nuclear cooperation. And there was a lawsuit regarding the intellectual property right of Westinghouse, which would have made it very difficult for South Korea to build nuclear power plants in the Czech Republic or in any other countries. So, but finally, the two countries agreed to cooperate. And so this kind of cooperation is going on. I am normally skeptical about the extent to which they can do together, but in any case, I don't think that has been too affected by the martial law declaration.
Okay. This next one asks about the impact on regional relationships. So, what are the broader implications of South Korea's political instability for Southeast Asia? And this one asks particularly its economic and diplomatic ties with countries like Laos, which recently agreed to elevate its relationships to a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2025. So that was just, as I recall, just late last year, October or so, when they had that agreement. But while this is an example, there are other efforts that were going on that must have some impingements or potential impingements, and I think that's what it's asking us.
Right. So we talked a lot about how South Korea's foreign policy toward many countries like China, the United States, Japan could change, but I don't really think that South Korea's relationship with Southeast Asia will change too much, because both the conservatives and the progressives understand the importance of Southeast Asia for especially South Korea's economy. It was Moon Jae-in actually who started this, earnest efforts to diversify South Korea's economy to address this huge reliance on China's economy, especially after China imposed sanctions against South Korea in 2016. And so,
and I should mention for the audience, Moon Jae-in was the president previous to Yoon Suk-yeol, and of course they served for 5 years, and so it was several years ago.
Right. So yeah, progressive leader Moon Jae-in, and also Yoon Suk-yeol succeeded the policy to a certain extent under a different name, in Indo-Pacific strategy. But I think that the Southeast Asia component, I think, was pretty much just maintained and sustained in the Indo-Pacific strategy. And I think Lee Jae-myung, if he becomes president, and he would also understand the importance of diversifying South Korea's economic relationship. And Southeast Asia is a very important partner for South Korea's economy. And so I don't think that South Korea's partnership with Laos and any other countries in Southeast Asia will suffer.
Okay. This next question is asking about lessons for emerging democracies. And so what lessons from South Korea's political turbulence can be applied by politicians in emerging democracies to strengthen governance and democratic resilience?
Yeah, I think that we can draw lessons for not only for emerging democracies, but all democracies. The South Korean case shows that democracies can backslide at any time, right? South Korea, although its history is democracy is pretty young. It's a relatively young democracy, but it was widely seen as a flourishing democracy. But something like this can happen in South Korea, and it could happen anywhere, really. Although, I think I've been just too pessimistic about the prospect of South Korea. I think that we should still remain optimistic, because what's the alternative, as many people say. I think that they always have to be vigilant about democratic backsliding, and then if people stay vigilant, they could protect their democracy. This Harvard professor, political scientists, Steve Levitsky and Daniel Zivlot published a book entitled "How Democracies Die," and they are not looking at a sort of drastic case like military coups, but they talk about how democracies backslide within the democratic system, just over time, gradually and incrementally. Just democratically elected officials undermine democratic values, and we have to be vigilant. So that's a lesson from this case.
Yeah, no, well said. It's we often take it for granted that democracies are on autopilot and secure, and in fact they take a lot of tending to maintain their robustness. Well, you brought up a book, and so, but let me ask you for another recommendation and that you might share with our audience regarding a book in this area or field that we're talking about today.
Yeah, so the book that I want to recommend is actually a novel written by South Korean novelist Han Gang, who recently received Nobel Prize in Literature. The award ceremony was actually last month. But this book, titled Human Acts, it's about a massacre, the Gwangju Uprising, and the massacre happened
Which was in May 1980, right?
May 1980. The story revolves around a death of a boy during the Gwangju Uprising. And unfortunately, still many believe in South Korea, some conservatives believe that the Gwangju protests was initiated by North Korean spies or North Korea sympathizers. And actually, when the Nobel Foundation announced this decision, some Korean conservative activists protested in front of, they traveled to Europe and they protested against this decision. But I think the book itself is a great book with great literary value, but I think the timing of the award was also quite striking. When I was watching the award ceremony last month, that was juxtaposed with a lot of protesters that are trying to protect their hard-fought democracy in these cold winter days. That made me sad that after this many years, 40-something years, people are still trying to protect their democracy. However, that gave me hope that these stories, their stories, and again, Gwangju and today's stories, will be told and will be remembered. So, yeah, I think that there is hope.
Thank you. I think clearly because of the degree of reward that was bestowed on this title, there are many people who agree with you that this is a book worth reading, and so thank you for that. I love taking time sitting together, and we've done it now here on the show 3 times, and I doubt that this is the last time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing with the audience.
Thank you very much. I hope that I don't have to come back too quickly, because when I'm invited back here, it's when something horrible happens.
This is true. The last time we had you here was because of what's happening with North Korea in Ukraine. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
As we conclude today's dialogue, South Korea's response to this crisis will define its democracy, its role in the Indo-Pacific, and its future as a global leader. These conversations shape security. Join us on January 27th as I speak with humanitarian advisor Jonathan Robinson on Indo-Pacific humanity and geopolitics. All of us at DKI APCSS thank you for joining this important conversation. I'm James Minnick. Until we meet again, aloha. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.